The Namibia Revenue Agency, there we've had one illness. Ms. Victoria Vuyula could not make it, but I believe Mr. Manim Haidula is here. Okay, maybe still on the way. The Master of the High Court is represented by the Deputy Master, Mrs. Olivia Vuchavikwa. Thank you, Ms. Vuchavikwa, for being here. The Ministry of Home Affairs is now finally represented, what an achievement, by the Deputy Director of Visas, Permits, Passports and Citizenships, Mr. Max Nilenge. Thank you, Mr. Nilenge. The Namibia Investment Promotion Development Board is represented by the Executive Investor Experience, Ms. Jessica Hawanga. And also by the Manager of Policy, Reforms and Business. This is now very small. And Business Climate. Here we have it. Manager of Policy Reform and Business Climate, Ms. Nangula Shiavali. We've also got the National Planning Commission, represented by Mr. Mano Sikanda, the Deputy Chief of the National Development Advisor. Thank you for attending, sir. We've got the Namibia Trade Forum represented here by Mr. Rodney Boabend. Is that correct? He's the acting CEO. And we've got the Namibia Chamber of Commerce and Industries here represented by its economist, Mr. Gabriel Erastus. Now, the people that know me know that I like to hijack platforms. I don't like it when other people do it, but I've got the prerogative now of giving you a little speech, which I'm going to read out on behalf of the Forum of German-Speaking Namibians. Dear representatives of the various institutions, members and friends of the Forum of German-Speaking Namibians, media representatives, we've got quite a few here today. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, we would like to welcome you all to this auspicious and very special occasion. My name is Harald Hecht, and I'm the proud chairman of the Forum of German-Speaking Namibians. And here we go. The main goal of the forum is as follows. The Forum of German-Speaking Namibians, motivated by their civil responsibility, their love and loyalty to Namibia, and being an integral part of the multicultural, multilingual Namibian society, commits itself to participate in an effective and meaningful way in the public life in Namibia, and thereby contribute to the well-being of the country and all its people. One of the key objectives of the Forum of German-Speaking Namibians, which was formed in April 2021, is to promote Namibia as an attractive business location, and to, should the occasion arise, act as mediator between local and foreign enterprises and institutions. And this is the occasion today. We believe that the public and private sector need to have a public dialogue on how we can improve the traditional ease of doing business in Namibia, which is now referred to as the business ready or be ready, and what effects this may have on Namibia's competitiveness, especially in the light of current and future increases in volumes of investments. Other issues identified to be addressed are what must be done to unlock the full potential of local and international trade? How can the private sector and local businesses lead Namibia's development path? Allow me to reiterate a few facts regarding Namibia's political environment, and I would say that it is fair that we have achieved political independence during the last 35 years. Namibia is governed by a world-famous and well-respected and recognized constitution, which is based on a separation of powers by the executive, legislative, and judicial branches with a regular transition of power. What is truly remarkable about our constitution is that the democratic form of government was adopted by all members of the Constituent Assembly at the end of 1989 and the beginning of 1990, despite various backgrounds from socialist or even communist to the dreaded apartheid systems, amongst others. We have had peace and stability over the last 35 years, but shared prosperity and progress remains a dream for the majority of Namibians. Now, a lot of investors from Europe are looking at Namibia as a safe haven and alternative destination or location, especially with the unfortunate events since February 2022, with the Russian invasion of the Ukraine and the war in the Gaza region since October 2023. This has further compounded this desire to leave Europe and look for greener pastures, or at least diversify investment portfolios. Viewed against this backdrop, Namibia feels like an oasis of calmness. Now, the biggest challenges for Namibia remain structural inequality.
Wir sehen nur deinen Bauch.
Oh, okay, das ist ja nicht so gut. The biggest challenge for Namibia remains structural inequality, effect of colonialism and apartheid, not mitigated in 35 years of independent Namibia. The Gini coefficient, measuring the gap between the rich and the poor, is widening instead of decreasing. Poverty and unemployment, food insecurity are increasing daily and rapidly, which is tantamount to an infringement of the social contract, which we have in terms of Article 95 of our Constitution, and which deals with the promotion of welfare of the people. Then we have Article 16 of our Constitution, which deals with the right of ownership of property of Namibians, and Article 80, which deals with the concept of administrative justice, whereby administrative bodies and officials shall act fairly and reasonably and comply with requirements imposed by common law. According to the latest census, Namibia's population growth is currently 3% per annum, and close to half of the current population of 3 million inhabitants is living below the poverty line. So, our population has doubled since 1990, but 50% is affected by poverty now, significantly more than at independence. The population growth is thus bigger than our economic growth, and this is not a sustainable political or business model. In fact, our social peace is at stake currently and seriously jeopardized and compromised. This will be the key challenge to be addressed to strengthen our democracy going forward with a shared prosperity for more and more Namibians and the restoration of the dignity of the 50% of our population which we have lost in the process of 35 years of independence. Let's use the strong political fundamentals of Namibia and address the country's weaknesses in the economic sectors. The recent reclassification as a lower middle income country is confirmation of a lack of progress, if not failure. Now here's our master plan for the future. Government needs to improve on the quality of the enabling environment and address and embrace all the new economic growth potential in Namibia in the oil and gas, green hydrogen and other mineral sectors, of which a lot of energy sources and minerals were only discovered and explored during the last 3 to 4 years, and maximize fully the return from these new opportunities. Namibia is a land of contrasts in many respects. On the one hand, we have the running rivers in the Kavango and Zambezi regions, whilst in the southwest and southeast of Namibia, we are surrounded by the Namib and Kalahari deserts. On the one hand, Namibia enjoys the second highest press freedom in Africa and is regarded as the 4th most stable country in Africa, but is only the 18th most attractive investment destination in Africa. Why? Namibia is also ranked in a very low position in the ease of doing business, in position 104 out of 190 economies worldwide. In 2008, Namibia was still in position number 54. So the latest ease of doing business statistic, which is probably outdated, but we've dropped from 54 to 104. We cannot and do not want to change the contrast in our scenic beauty, but we want and must change the contrast in the rankings that matter, in Namibia finally achieving economic independence after gaining our political independence in 1990. We need to start that journey of economic transformation now. To quote Her Excellency, our President, Madame Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, we need to change our mindset. And she also said recently, the future belongs to those who work hard towards a common vision. The future belongs to those who work hard toward a common vision. The latest pronouncements that the government seeks to engage with the private sector is very well received. And the planned job creation program of 250,000 to 500,000 jobs can only succeed if we tackle the ease of doing business as part of the envisaged common vision by critically analyzing our service delivery at all levels, capacity requirements, and political willpower. Through unity and diversity and a shared and well-defined common vision, we will be stronger as a nation. Let's go forward together by looking back and learning. Let's make genuine strides towards economic independence in terms of NDP 6 Vision 2030. The key missing element in Vision 2030 has been implementation. There is no business as usual. It is now time for introspection and uncomfortable truths. One Namibia,
One nation.
one nation. I thank you.
We still have chairs over here. Ma'am, we still have chairs over here if you would like.
Okay. Thank you very much for the attentive listening. I now, without further ado, want to hand over to Mr. Roland Brown, economist and co-founder, and not economist, director and co-founder of Cirrus Capital. I don't think he needs so much of an introduction. He's quite prominent in the media, and we are very happy to have you here today, Roland, and we look forward to your presentation. We are running 2 minutes late, but I think in the Namibian context, that is something we can live with. Thank you very much.
Just give me 1 minute.
Right, thank you very much. Well, we get this going. I must express my gratitude for the invitation, but I think mostly the fact that you ran late first, and that I will not be the one to do that at this auspicious event. It was a great concern. I don't usually get stressed when I present. I do so many of these things, but I was a little bit stressed about the timeline when I arrived this morning at exactly 8:30 and the room was already full. So I'm not very good at sticking to the timelines, but I will do my best. I was sitting next to Ingo, which, as many of you will know, is not the best way to start your morning if you want to have an enthusiastic and upbeat presentation. But I'm not here to give a macro overview or an outlook presentation or something like this, like I so often do. What I'm doing this morning is I'm trying to explain some linkages and why, on this very accurate assessment of the situation that we sit with in Namibia at the moment, where we have a great deal of human suffering, why it is that we're talking about investment. And I think this may seem quite trivial, but I think it's very important. And the reason that I say this is something that I can perhaps explain in a short anecdote. So me and one of the other people in this room, amongst a few others, in 2015 spent probably about 2.5 hours with at that point, not minister, but subsequently a minister, talking about how a certain piece of policy that was floating around at the time was going to be enormously detrimental to investment in the country. And after 2 hours, 2 and a bit hours, it looked as if we were getting somewhere. We all said our polite thank yous and goodbyes, and off we went. And as we were leaving, this individual said, Brown, can you just stay a minute? And I thought, shoot, I'm in trouble here. I've done most of the talking, and I'm not sure if these chaps will see me again. And we sat down together and we talked, very cordial, as most engagements in Namibia are. And after a bit of back and forth and so on, the reason that I'd been asked to remain became clear. She said, this individual said, just explain to me, why does investment matter? And this was a bit of a shock. It was such an unexpected, I thought it was so evident that investment was absolutely critical, that it didn't really need explaining. But what I've come to realize subsequently is that investment is a very esoteric concept to a lot of people. It's a kind of amorphous topic to a lot of people. And if you think about it, more than half of the Namibian population has probably never been in a position to invest in a very conventional sense. And so the understanding of why investment is so fundamental to an economy is perhaps also not, always that relevant and obvious to people. And so I want to try to explain these linkages and why it is that we talk about investment here. And then there's other economists on the program later who I think will be able to contribute some more specific outlook and related type things. So I am a man of my word, and I also committed to death by PowerPoint. So I'm glad that it's early on a Saturday morning. I hope you're all rested and ready. So I'm going to take you through these points. So I'm going to talk about the macro problems. I think Harold has actually done quite a good introduction to that, but I'm going to emphasize some points. Then I'm going to talk about what macro actually is, because I think that this is very poorly understood. And you'll often hear questions like, is the economy working for everyone? And I challenge you to ask the positor of that question, what is the economy? And I suspect that they'll struggle to answer. So what is macro? It's probably also something that I think a lot of people will struggle to answer. Then we'll take it from macro into investment, the business climate, and then some concluding thoughts. So that's the outline. I've only got 50 slides, Robin, so you don't need to stress too much. So let the death by charts begin. I hope you're all ready. So chart number one. Chart number one shows real GDP per capita. So we're adjusting for inflation and we're dividing by the population. And what you can see here is that Namibia did very well from independence up until 2015. Our GDP per capita grew, which meant the economy grew faster than the population grew. But as you can see from 2015, and this is important, it's not COVID, it's pre-COVID, things started to go wrong. So we mustn't allow this to be blamed on COVID. And now in the most recent data that we have, because of the rampant population growth that we saw, particularly since the last census, you can see this decline in GDP per capita. Now, one of my data colleagues argues that this is because Namibians were very happy about the economy growing and they had a lot of children. But I don't think that that's the entirety of the story. But basically, we're now, from a GDP per capita perspective, back at 2006 levels. So it's a decade later that we peak, and it's close to a decade after that we're back. So 20 years of per capita income. Now, this is a very rudimentary measure. This is low fidelity, because we're just taking the average GDP or the GDP and we're dividing it by people. But that's not how an economy works. So over the period from 2015 until 2025, some people have become more wealthy. It's a small percent of the population, perhaps, but some people have. But what that tells you is that another portion of the population has become significantly less well off. Significantly less well off. And you can see this in unemployment numbers. And we'll talk about why macro is low fidelity and not very useful shortly. But what is very useful and what is very important is household income. Household income is probably, and the aggregate of household income, which I'll talk about in a moment, is probably the most important macroeconomic indicator. The reason for this is that this is where it affects people. GDP is esoteric. Who cares? GDP is up, down. What we care about is, does it help people? Are people's lives improving? And employment is the primary source of income for households. And income at household level is the primary source of human development and human improvement. And what I like to do with audiences is to challenge you to put yourself in the shoes of a 35-year-old who graduated from university, whose family did everything that they could to get that kid through university, whose friends sacrificed, whose extended family sacrificed to get that kid through university. And that kid is now 35 and has been unemployed for a decade. The impact that that has on individuals and the desperation that it drives and so on. It's very easy for us to look at these numbers as, again, macroeconomic numbers without actually putting yourself in the shoes of the individuals who we're talking about here. And what you can see from this, you may recognize this chart. It got quite a lot of traction, and I should probably credit it to my colleague who made it. But the Statistics Agency after not releasing unemployment data since 2018, eventually last year, just before actually this year, just after the elections, released unemployment figures. And what they did is they tried to compare this broad definition of unemployment to the strict definition of unemployment to say unemployment had got worse, but only slightly worse. But this is not the same. This is not comparing apples with apples. It was an apples to oranges comparison. If you look at an apples to apples comparison, our 33.4% unemployment increased to 55%, just under 55% unemployment over the past 5 years. So this macroeconomic trend that we see so clearly in the GDP per capita, we can see very clearly in this much more important indicator of household incomes. In addition to this, only 45% of the population is employed. But of that portion that's employed, you can see that the average salaries, this is monthly salaries, are extraordinarily low. And 50% of the persons who are classified as employed, and the question in the census that determines whether you're employed is, have you worked for a cash or an in-kind income? So not necessarily just a cash income, but also an in-kind income, like a plate of food. In the last week, so a very short period of time, you may have been lucky and got some work in the last week, for more than an hour. So the bar to determine whether you are employed, when the Statistics Agency comes and asks you the census questions or the labor force survey questions, you don't necessarily know that your answer to that question determines whether you will be classified as employed or not. But so the bar is incredibly low. A huge portion of the population, the working age population, slithers under that bar. And even those that say yes, 50% are earning less than 3,000 NAM a month. And 75% are earning below this line, of this line in the graph, which is more or less your tax threshold. So 10,000 NAM per month. So this tells you a lot about human development at a very broad macro aggregate level. And you can see it illustrated very nicely in this chart that one of my colleagues put together for us as well. So you have a population of 3 million people, working age of 1.9, labor force of 1.2, and employed is only 546,000. But of that employed group, the taxpayers are only about 110, 120,000 because such a big portion fall outside of that tax net. And so you have this enormous dependency on that employed group from the Namibian population, so a dependency ratio of over 5. And this, of course, translates into political issues. Apparently, this chart is unpatriotic, but that's fine. But it, of course, translates into political issues. People are rational. It's not just one or two of us that are rational. People in general are rational. When their material living standards don't improve the way that they expect them to, they want them to, they've been promised they will, of course, they do the rational thing. Perhaps there's not a short fuse or a short response to this. But over time, you can see how the change in economic conditions results in a change in political outcomes. And you'll remember that the GDP per capita dropped off aggressively in 2015. Well, the correlation between that ramp up in economic growth and GDP per capita up to about 2015 correlates very strongly with this ramp up in support for the incumbent party. And the subsequent period shows a very similar drop. This is not something that we should be shocked by. This is people behaving rationally. And if you ask people what their major issues are, so this is from the Afrobarometer surveys, if you ask people what their major concerns are, their major issues are, these are not crazy things. These are exactly the same concerns that you have, that your children had, that your parents had before you. Economic issues. Do I have a job? Do I have income? Or the other part of this, am I in poverty? Which links very much to do I have a job? And similar. So this macro situation is clearly what we should be worried about. And so why the heck are we talking about investment? What does investment have to do with this? So before we get to the answer to that, I want to talk about what is macroeconomics, because I've got the soapbox, so I might as well use it. Is it possible to get some water at some point? I'm going to dry out soon. Thanks. So this is a very, very rudimentary explanation of a complex thing, which is what I try to do with these sorts of issues. So what is micro and microeconomics? It's the focus on individual activities, individual behavior, individual decisions. Thank you. And the extension of that, the activities of small groups of people. So businesses don't really exist, right? Businesses are just agreements. And so businesses are collectives of people that agree to do stuff together and agree to sell things to other people and so on. So businesses also fit within this microspace. But what is macro? The macroeconomic situation, unemployment, for example, is just the aggregate of all of these micro activities. So when we talk about the unemployment level in the country, all that we're doing is basically aggregating together all of the jobs created, whether you ask the job creator or the employer. All that we're doing is aggregating together all of those numbers. The same with our export figures, the same with our tax revenue figures, the same with our GDP figures. All we're doing is we're aggregating all of these micro things together in order to get that macro number. And I just want to focus on this specific point, individual businesses, as we take this forward. But ultimately, as I say, businesses are just the decisions of individuals. So when somebody asks you, is the economy working for everyone? You have to disaggregate it down and down and down and down. And ultimately, what it comes to is, what is the ability of the individuals within an area to interact with one another, to trade with one another, to buy and sell goods and services, etc. That's all that it's about. So there's a huge difference between these two, between the objectives of enterprises and individuals and the objectives at macro level. And this is a perversion that we see in Namibia that we need to put an end to. The question that we often get asked, or perhaps an anecdote here is better than to go to the questions. An anecdote that we get here. We have, amongst other things, an investment arm in our business. And we have a lot of very bright young people who come through our doors who say, we have this great business plan, and we're going to create a lot of employment, and we're going to solve this NDP goal, and we're going to solve that UN goal, and so on. And my first question to these individuals is, do you make a profit? And they look shocked, as if I've asked them to drop their trousers in the office or something. But we've created this perversion where we try to make the macroeconomic outcomes, the aggregates, the problems of the micro enterprises. We say to the mining sector, you're not doing enough for job creation, as if the mining sector exists to create jobs. And this is fatally flawed. Micro enterprises exist to produce goods or services and sell those goods and services, so find markets and similar, for a price that's greater than the cost of producing them. And if they don't do that, they cease to exist. They close their doors, and everybody that they employ goes home. All the products and services that they were once producing disappear from the GDP calculation, etc. This is what micro enterprises have to focus on. And if they get big and they produce gold and they can save the world a little bit at the same time, great. But the primary focus is survival, which is profit. In the process of doing this, they create a lot of jobs. Some industries a lot more than others, but they create jobs. And those jobs get aggregated up into that unemployment number, or that employment number, the inverse of the unemployment. They also produce goods and services. So either they produce goods that get exported, or they produce goods that get consumed locally, resulting in fewer imports. So they have a positive impact on net exports. And they should, if they make a bit of profit, pay tax. I say should. On the macro side is a completely different story. The macro side of this is aggregating up all of those numbers and looking for holes to say, we're not seeing as many jobs being created at micro level as we should. We're not seeing the exports that we would like to see. These chaps aren't paying the tax they're supposed to be paying. That's what should be happening at macro level. And then focusing on where there's holes that the micro space is not able to fill. A kid that's never had access to education. It's unconscionable that that kid continues to not have access to education because of where in the country they're born, which side of the railway tracks, as it were. So how do we redistribute some of those tax revenues in order to ensure that everybody gets an opportunity? These are the kinds of critical things that happen at macro level. And then managing it through the cycle, managing it through the ups and downs of the world, in order to try to smooth things out and in order to try to create sustainability through that cycle. And the impact is ultimately human development, stability, and most critically, investment in the micro side. And so you've got a neat little loop here. Your micro enterprises create the macro outcome. And the macro outcome being right, macro outcomes being right, you know, everybody having an opportunity, nobody having an incentive to flip the system over, to go and burn things in the street, to demand 51% of every mining investment, etc. The macro being right encourages more investment, and you create a virtuous cycle. You can do the opposite as well. You can create a destructive cycle, and that's a big risk that we perhaps face at the moment. And the measure of success for macro and micro are very different. A successful micro enterprise is one that is profitable, because a profitable enterprise is one that can continue. It's one that can remain open. It can grow. Well, what does growth mean? You're producing more goods and services. You're creating more employment. These are all things that aggregate up to good macro outcomes, but it's achieved at micro level. It's achieved at enterprise level. And when you aggregate it up, it's a great success at macro level. The ability to save and invest, and then again, a little loop, sustainability, the ability to keep doing this so that you never have to close your doors and send people home, stop producing, stop paying tax, etc., etc. At macro, the objective is different, but the macro objective is not the objective of micro enterprise. Micro enterprise doing what it does provides the macro outcome. So household incomes, this is fundamentally important. Again, imagine, put yourself in the shoes of the individual that needs to wait for government to bring them a toilet. How many of you waited for government to bring you a toilet? Or how many of you were able to generate an income and go and buy your own toilet? Pay the plumber to make sure that it works properly. Income at household level is very, very fundamental to human development. So household income is critical. And overall, the macro objective is human development and broad-based human development. So tax revenues create the ability to redistribute, to provide public services, to make it easier for micro enterprise to operate, etc., etc. Exports, ability to trade, ability to have prominence within the world. And then same thing, sustainability, to keep doing this generation after generation after generation. The objectives of micro and macro are very different and should not be conflated. And the failings at macro level should not be pointed at the few micro enterprises that are actually contributing very meaningfully to this whole macro outcome, and asked why the mining sector is not doing more, amongst other things. The bottom line here is that companies that don't make profit cease to exist. Some quickly, some slowly. It depends how much you inherited from your grandfather, perhaps. But if you don't make profit, at some point you cease to exist. It's that simple. And profit, we need to wrap our head around this thing. Profit is not evil. There was a previous finance minister who told me that profit was evil. It's not evil, it's fundamental. Without profit, micro disappears. And without micro, you have nothing to aggregate. Your GDP, your employment, it all disappears. So profit is not evil, but there is a fine print here. So you can't see all of it. But there is fine print here, so this is probably important. There are some forms of profit that are evil, so we need to just be a little bit careful on this one. So profit that's derived through externalities, so you're polluting a river in order to make your profit, that is evil, obviously. Profit that's derived through exploitation, that's obviously, you know, if you enslave people in order to make a profit, obviously that's evil. But profit in and of itself, honest profit, by producing goods and services and selling these to people who voluntarily buy them, people who voluntarily work in order to create them, etc., etc., that is not evil, that's absolutely fundamental. Sorry?
Thanks.
Thanks, yeah. Well, you do have a choice whether you want to borrow from a bank or not. But from this, I think it should be clear, or I hope I've made my point, that macro problems are micro problems. The macro outcomes that we see have their origins in micro issues. And I hope that this is clear. Because aggregates of unemployment show that there's little economic activity at micro level. The micro enterprises are not creating the jobs that you need in order to aggregate up to full employment. The same with your GDP components. So I'll bore you to death with this once again. There are only a few GDP components. And the aggregate of these components is what gives you GDP. So you have household consumption, you have government spending, you have investment, and you have these two are net exports, so exports minus imports, and that gives you GDP. But this is also called aggregate demand. So there's lots of different ways of calculating these things, and they should all give you the same answers. They never do. But this is also called aggregate demand. Aggregate, obviously, I'm sure I don't have to explain this, but aggregate being the summation of all of these components and their underlying. So all of the household consumption put together gives you the total household consumption. All of government spending put together gives you government spending, et cetera, et cetera. And all investment gives you, so every little line of investment that NIPDB brings, big line of investment that NIPDB brings in, aggregates together to contribute to your GDP and to your aggregate demand. So why are we talking about investment within this group of things? So we've talked about household consumption. Household consumption is a function of two things. It's a function of how much income are households generating, which is a function of employment and wages, how many people are employed and how much are they earning, and savings, net savings. So in Namibia, we have a bad record of saving. We actually save contractually quite well. So we have a big contractual saving pool, pension funds and similar, but discretionary savings is like zero. We have this marginal propensity to consume, which is a horrible economic term, which is for every dollar of income that you generate, how much of that dollar do you spend? When we calculated this a few years ago, the answer was just over 1. So you borrow against your dollar. So this is obviously not ideal, but high unemployment tells you most of what you need to know about household consumption and the trends on household consumption. So household consumption is a major issue within our GDP calculation. And I won't dwell on this point too much because I'm going to go horrifically over time and I'll be ousted. The second portion is government expenditure. And what you can see from this chart on your left here is that government expenditure has flatlined in inflation-adjusted terms also since that same 2015 period. So obviously an economy not really growing means that government expenditure can't really grow. And again, like with households, government expenditure is a function of two things, income and net savings. So in this instance, much like households, net savings is negative, we're borrowing. So this is, the total bar is expenditure, and this is revenue. So the difference is borrowing. And so you can see that despite it being a difficult few years for government spending, stagnating government spending in inflation-adjusted terms, we've only been able to keep expenditure at sort of roughly the levels it's been at by quite extensive borrowing. And that gives you this chart on this side, which shows you just how aggressively government debt has ramped up. So back in 2010-11, we had 16% debt to GDP, and we've gone up to around 70. And that drop that we've seen recently is basically just driven by the fact that we had oil and gas related activity, which brought GDP up and brought that ratio down a little bit. But the bottom line is that debt to GDP, this ratio of government debt has got to very high levels, and our debt is relatively expensive. So you'll have people say, yeah, but other countries have 100%. Other countries that have 100% don't pay 7-8% real rates. They pay much lower rates. So this is getting to kind of quite uncomfortable levels. Now, somebody was telling me the other day, German businesses have two approaches to debt. Either they want all of the debt or none of the debt, but nothing in between. So for some of you, this will be shocking. For others, it will be like looking at your financials. And then the third component of GDP before we get to investment is net exports. And I don't want to dwell on this, but basically net exports is largely exogenously determined. So it's largely determined by external factors, not internal factors. So commodity prices being the biggest one. We can increase and reduce commodity volumes in the short term relatively little, but prices can fluctuate quite a bit. So in the short term, it tends to be exogenous. Longer term, it depends on investment, which I'll talk about in a moment. But so what you can see here is that this too has been negative. So net exports, exports minus imports, has been negative. The only time that it spiked positively was when imports dropped quite a bit after the Chinese chap ate the bat. But other than that, we tend to be a net exporter a net importer of goods and services. And as a result of that, we have government spending, we have household spending, and we have net exports, which are not in a great place, none of the three. And that basically takes us to the last one, which is old reliable investment. So investment is this kind of exogenous pulse that can drive some activity in the economy. So if you have household incomes under pressure, if you have government income under pressure, how do you fix that internally? And when I say internally, I mean within, the sort of local space. I'm not talking about, anyway, I don't think that's too critical. But how do we create this pulse that drives recovery? It is investment. So how and why is it investment? So the first thing is investment, whether it's domestic or foreign. I think often when I talk about investment, people imagine, Harold with his briefcase coming in from Germany with stacks of cash. And it's not that Harold is foreign anymore, but they imagine a foreign investor in a nice suit and so on arriving here and trying to take resources out of the country. I'm talking about investment on a very broad base. I'm talking about micro investment from poorer Namibians. I'm talking about, Namibian investment from corporates, et cetera, and foreign investment as well. And somebody once asked me, not once, this happens quite often, but asked me, is foreign or local investment more important? I said, I want both. Boris Johnson made the comment once that he's pro having his cake and eating it. And that's very much my view on investment. Why pick one if you can have both? And so investment starts a factory, for example, or starts a mine or something like this. And in that process, it creates jobs. Investors don't invest unless they can generate surpluses because they don't want to put money into something that they can't keep the doors open on. Those surpluses should be taxed, or the employment is taxed, or both. And so it generates tax. So this is, well, let me get there. I'm going to preempt myself here. And then they produce products and services, which either increase exports or reduce imports. So you either consume what they produce domestically or you export it. So in the GDP calculation, investment drives household consumption, it drives government spending, and it drives net exports. And these all have feedback loops. So I tried to figure out how to do this in a chart to show that they're feedback. But household consumption also drives tax. There's VAT on it. Government spending also drives household consumption, et cetera, et cetera. And so these things are all very, very interlinked. But the pulse, when you have an economy in the state of our economy, comes from that investment. And so how are we doing on the investment front? I've given you doom and gloom on the other fronts. And Robin's still coming. So, I can't leave you too suicidal or he'll finish the job. So how are we doing on this front? Well, it looks pretty good. I mean, from 2021, we started to see this big upswing in one of the measures of investment, which is fixed capital investment. This is the good type of investment, right? You get multiple types of investment. You get short-term financial market investments, carry trades and these sorts of things. And then you get investment into fixed capital assets. Fixed capital assets is factories, mines, these sorts of things. That's what you want. That's a good leading indicator that this investment is going to create some jobs. It's going to pay some tax. It's going to do good things for the economy. And if you look at the fixed capital stock, it's also started to pick up quite nicely after a period of stagnation. So investment generally is looking quite good. And if you look at foreign investment, which is one of the measures of business climate, you can see we had a torrid period here where from 2015, investment started to disappear. Now, some of you may remember some of the policy things that were going on at that point. And that's relevant later on in the presentation, perhaps. But subsequent to that, we've seen this enormous swing up in FDI. So there's a lot of foreign investment coming into the country at the moment. And that's good for job creation, tax, all those other things. But strip mining out. This is onshore mining and oil and gas. Strip mining out. and you go from the blue bar to the red bars, or the lines. And you can see investment outside of the mining space. The trajectory is very, very worrying. And the fixed capital stock, the rate of investment now the last few years has only been enough to sustain the existing fixed capital stock. So your replacement rate is, or your net FDI, so this is gross fixed capital investment. Your net fixed capital investment is 0. And if you consider that fixed capital investment, different audiences appreciate different things. But if you consider that fixed capital investment, it tends to be investment into more technology and labor replacement. So just by sustaining that in your non-mining sector, you're probably seeing a reduction in employment. There's not new fixed capital investment that's going to be relatively labor intensive. And what this tells us is that we are extremely reliant on the mining industry. So with this information, it would be a terrible idea to go and say that 51% of every dollar invested in mining must be given to the state, something like that. That would be an awful thing to do. I'm sure nobody would do anything like that. But mining in and of itself doesn't fix all these problems. Mining doesn't create a lot of direct jobs. So it does create some, and they're good jobs. They're high-paid jobs. So it's very valuable. Again, pro having cake and pro eating it, right? We don't want to say we don't want the 2,000 jobs that you're going to create in the mining industry because we want 100,000 jobs somewhere else. We can have both. But we need that investment into the mining industry. It does pay a lot of tax, but often has long lead times on this. And there's again, this perversion of macro versus micro. So there's a perception that the mining industry doesn't do enough for the economy. But you've got 5 or 6 mines that pay 30% of the tax that the rest of the corporates in the country pay combined. So you've got a very small number of entities that make an enormous tax contribution. And roughly, in most instances, roughly 50% of net income gets split, or the net income gets split roughly 50-50 to government and the shareholders. So mining contributes a huge amount of revenue to the fiscus. You rarely hear the question of where that money is being used. And instead, you have the flogging of the micro enterprise to say it's not doing enough. And I don't use micro in the sense of small, I use it in an economic sense, but say it's not doing enough, not creating enough jobs, not doing enough this, not doing enough that. So mining is very important here, but it's not the only thing. And it's not the thing that's going to result in this big push to household incomes. It will help fiscal revenues and it'll help government spend a bit more, but it's not going to drive household incomes directly. And so then the big question is, how does government spend its share of the take from the mining industry? And it obviously creates, there's a lot of local consumption that's driven by the mining industry as well as intermediate consumption. But the mining industry is a very bad proxy for your investment climate, which is what we're here to talk about. And as we get to the end of my time, I'm not nearly done. I'm just about to get to the actual question I was asked. But mining is a bad proxy for the investment climate because you can only mine minerals where the minerals are. So it doesn't matter how good the investment climate is in Rwanda. If they don't have uranium, you can build uranium mines till kingdom come. You're not going to get anywhere. So these industries tend to be a lot less sensitive to the investment environment. It's the rest of the sectors, many of the rest of the sectors of the economy that are much more sensitive to it. And so what happened there? This is just the point that I make about the employment intensity, so the capital versus labor intensity of the mining industry. So in general, you're looking at about $1 million NAM on average to create of fixed capital investment in order to create one sustainable job. In the mining industry, it's closer to 7 million. So you don't have similar ratios. And there's another important point to make here, is that our current environment is hugely mining dependent. And you can see the impact of single sector dependencies in Angola. You can see it in Botswana at the moment and so on. We're much more diversified, but it's still a single sector and it's still risky. And this can get a lot worse, right? feet up on the desk, oil's coming, we don't need to reform, you know, all of our problems are going to be taken care of. This is a very dangerous situation. So if you strip out this one industry, Namibia looks to be in a very difficult, a very bad position. Okay, so why aren't we seeing other sectors? Why aren't we seeing significant investment in other sectors? It's very clear that we have a business climate issue. There's a great saying that, wait, I didn't put it on this slide, but this lack of investment into these other sectors is why we see very high levels of unemployment, growth stagnation, fiscal stagnation, etc. And we've become hugely dependent on this one extractive industry, this mining industry. And obviously that's not sustainable. And actually, I showed you this chart before, and I pointed you to this. And I said that there's a big dependency issue here. There's a much bigger issue, which is that. That's your real dependency issue. Fewer than 16,000 job creators. We don't have a crisis of unemployment in Namibia. We have a crisis of employers. Who's creating the jobs? Who's creating the opportunities? And why aren't they doing that? And this is not changing. This is a major issue. Very small, Tim. It's 15,228, which is probably quite ambitious as well. But anyway. So if you want to fix the macro, you need to fix this micro issue. And this feeds into lots of other things. If we had done NEF right, if we had done the empowerment legislation right, we would start with a problem statement where we would say, we think that there hasn't been a great deal of transformation within the corporate sector since independence. We don't have data because we don't collect data on these things. So then we would go and collect data on it. And we would work through a process that would ultimately look at whether this is true, it probably is or possibly is, and why it's true, why it's happened. One of the main things that we would find, in my suspicion, is that there are very few new post-independence businesses started in Namibia, grown in Namibia to become large businesses. And if you look at those that they are, they tended to have some slight edge. So they had some capital, tended to be a white-owned business. They had some access to capital if they didn't have it themselves. They had some collateral assets. They had a house that they could leverage, these sorts of things in order to grow these businesses. But a fundamental problem is that we have not created an environment in which small businesses can start, where the kids of today can start a business and they can grow that business into the big businesses of tomorrow. So what you find in Namibia, with few exceptions, is that businesses are old or businesses are foreign. Find me the young businesses. There are a few, but it's far too few. So fix the investment environment, and you'll fix the macro. So what specifically do we need to do? We need to create an ability for the young kids who want to start a business, who want to grow a business, who want to become the Frans Ndongos of tomorrow or the Mr. Brunts of tomorrow, or whatever it is, to make it possible for them to make a profit. If they don't make a profit, doors close, go home. And Namibia is very unforgiving in this space as well. It's not like you can try again later. Right? It's one shot for the most part. How do you make a profit? It's simple: income, expenses, tax. These are the three things we need to focus on. How do we make it easy to maximize income, minimize expenses? And usually you have to pay Deloitte a lot of money to give you this sort of advice. Solution to your problems is to increase income or reduce expenses. So money flows where money grows. If it's easy to start a business in Namibia, if it's easy to make that business survive, it's much more likely that people will invest into it. One of the reasons it's difficult to find venture funding in Namibia is because we kill small businesses. I'm reluctant to put my hand into my pocket to support, somebody's small business, because I know their chance of survival is low. And in many instances, it's not that they don't have a good business idea. We get good business ideas through our office regularly. We also get very bad ones. But access to capital is a symptom of a problem as well as a problem. I think this is a tangent to what I actually wanted to say. But anyway, so let's just quickly look at Namibia from an income perspective. We start at a disadvantage. It's not good enough to be the top 50 in the world. Harold's stats are questionable, and I say that because I've got the same stats later and they're different. So I blame Harold because I'm speaking afterwards. But from a doing business perspective, it's not good enough just to be in the bottom half or something like the top half or something like this. We actually started a natural disadvantage. We have a small population, a small addressable market. There's a small number of people that you can sell your things to. Most of that population is not employed. And 75% are earning less than 10,000 NAM dollars a month. And they have huge dependency. So the people that have that income, you hear about black tax and these sorts of things. It's not exclusively a racial thing. If I look at how many people I support, my friends support, and so on, you take responsibility for other people that have less than you. You have to. And so you have these high dependency ratios. And as a result of these relatively low incomes, these very high dependency ratios, the vast majority of the money that people have gets spent on consumer staples, not discretionary things. This is food, it's housing, it's transport. So this is why there's a big drive to develop local basic goods industry, pasta, chicken, cement, the things that people have to buy, milk. I ask always a question, at what cost and who's paying it? And in my mind, it's unconscionable that we drive up the price of milk and poor people end up paying that price. If we want to subsidize milk production, for example, we should be making sure that it's those that can afford to subsidize it, not those that can't. But anyway, that's an issue for another day. There's also significant regional and global competition. So it's difficult to generate income in Namibia. And we have a limited ability to mass produce and export because we're not competitive, because our input costs are too high. So to fix this market issue, you need to look outside of the border. But in order to be able to compete outside of the border, you need to be able to be cost competitive. So let's go to costs. The major input costs for most businesses are similar. This is now a bit of a generalization, but obviously we have to do that. Labor, logistics, energy, property, plant and equipment, capital, time. These are the main things. Obviously, there's some additional ones and different businesses will be different. But Namibia has stringent labor laws, low labor productivity and high unit labor costs. This is a bond study. This isn't me saying this. Please don't shoot me. A bond study. Admittedly, I was involved in the study, but it was done by the central bank and it's a good study. But the labor productivity is relatively low and unit labor costs are relatively high. So one of the big inputs, labor, we're not very competitive. Our distance to the market means logistics are relatively expensive, but we do have good infrastructure, excellent port, excellent roads. We don't talk about rail. 90% of our rail infrastructure was installed before 1932. So we have a problem on that. We have the highest energy prices in the region, and we don't have that much energy. So we'll quickly run into issues with energy if we have, and Harold will now ask me a question about this. But we will run into energy issues if we actually have a lot of energy intensive investment. There's increasing land uncertainty. And from a time perspective, there's just no urgency. We have tax is the third point that I made. We have an uncompetitive tax. This is a cheat, I have to be honest. I'm very bad at lying. And I always feel guilty when I see slides like this. But we cheated here because this is all the same, but we put Namibia at this end to emphasize the point. So we have a relatively uncompetitive tax rate. And as I mentioned before, we start at a disadvantaged position. We don't have a big market. We don't have access to a big market. We've got a lot of constraints on the input side. And then we add a relatively uncompetitive tax rate. But more than that, we have a one-dimensional tax rate. So this is, let me just use my company as an example. This is Cirrus 8 years ago. This is Cirrus 5 years ago. And this is Cirrus today. Same tax rate, same tax rate, same tax rate, same tax rate, same tax. Now we have some fruit. We paid our first dividends fairly recently. We paid 30% tax from day one. Actually, it was 32%. Now that we're actually able to pay dividends, we're going to be hit with a dividend tax as well. But anyway, This isn't my personal gripe. But the point here is that we ask these small businesses, some chap with a great business idea that can solve a problem for people, that will produce a good that people want to buy. And we tell them 30% cash you probably don't have, because unless you're expensing your CapEx, you probably don't have the first few years the cash in your bank that your income statement says, that your income statement says you made in profit. And so a huge portion of these businesses' cash gets swept out to the receiver when they're in their infancy. And cash is critical for this growth. And so one needs to look at tax brackets. This doesn't hurt Ingo. Sorry, Ingo. This doesn't hurt Ingo. It doesn't hurt F&B. It hurts the little guys. It hurts the new businesses. It hurts the Namibian entrepreneurs, of which there are plenty that want to create jobs and opportunities. And this is just one of many examples. So there's 201 countries in here. And Harold, I'll just say that it's important we went from 50 to 100 because of the addition of new countries, not because we slid that badly. Okay. But we are still, it doesn't matter, we're still in a bad position. So this is out of 201 countries that Namibia ranked 104 the last time the World Bank did this study, which was 2020. So it is a bit outdated. But I don't think that the situation has changed that much. It certainly hasn't got a lot easier. And this is before we talk about general permitting and licensing, VAT refunds, various approvals, and so on. And I see somebody at the back of the room who's extremely unhappy about this. Try and get a water abstraction permit from the Ministry of Agriculture. Try and get an environmental clearance certificate. And again, the important... I've only got another 28 slides. No, I've only got a couple more. But I'll wrap it up shortly. So who does it hurt most? I think this is very, very important. This is just randomly selected, so please, B2 Gold at the top, highly profitable. There's one of them, actually 2 or 3, but there's few of them. Banks, highly profitable, few of them. Your real sector companies, Paratus, Number Mills, etc., a bit less profitable, a few more of them. A bit less profitable again, a few more of them. Down here, we have a large number of small businesses who are not very profitable. They're at break even. And under here is the ones that died or we killed. These are the small businesses. And the cost of bureaucracy, the more we can drop that cost of bureaucracy, the easier we make it to do business. It doesn't change B2 Gold's life very much. It changes the small companies that are clinging on for dear life. It changes them. And those are the companies that can ultimately grow to become the next Number Mills or F&B or whatever it is. And the number of employees is similar. I don't know how many people B2 Gold employs now, say 1,000 to 2,000. These guys individually don't employ a lot, but collectively, they create a huge number of jobs. Many of these small businesses operate on little or no margin. If you spend 10% of their time dealing with permits, and this is very ambitious, or dealing with getting VAT back, or 15% of their cash, their revenue, being stuck in a VAT reclaim process, dead. They will never become a large business. This is all it is. And it creates a negative feedback loop to revenue, to company revenues. So remember, let's go wrap it up. It's not all doom and gloom. I think this is an important point. It's not all doom and gloom at all. But before I explain why, I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page. Macro problems are micro problems. Investment is absolutely fundamental at micro level in order to create jobs and opportunities. But investment doesn't happen unless investors can generate a return. So all of these things that and I'm talking big and small, local, foreign, all of these things that we do that make it more difficult to generate that return loops back to the macro outcomes. It loops back to unemployment. It loops back to GDP growth. It loops back to per capita incomes. It loops back to household incomes. So if we want to fix these outcomes, unemployment, we have to dig down into these micro things. And ultimately, we have a business climate issue that results in these macro problems. So the question is, is government a policeman trying to stop and control micro activities? And I had a discussion actually with somebody in this room about this. I completely understand why people that have been removed of or have had little power at points in their lives feel a want to never go back there again and never want to be out of control again. I think this is completely understandable. But if we have a government that wants to control every micro decision made by businesses, the ultimate outcome is going to be unemployment and the political things that the political trend that I showed earlier. So while I understand this sort of government command and control mentality, I don't think that it is in our interest. I don't think. I think it's very clear it's not in our interest. And I think that it's something that we need to push back against, and we need to keep doing these sorts of events to explain. Or is government the enabler, looking to maximize micro activity, celebrating profit? Profit made the right way, not profit from exploitation, not profit from externalities and so on, but celebrating micro activity. And I bring this chart up once more because we're on a dangerous trajectory at the moment. The previous round of populist policy impacted micro investment decisions, and you can see what happened with FDI, you can see what happened with gross fixed capital formation. Money left. This is why investment is important. Money left. GDP per capita dropped, unemployment increased, investment retreated. Then we started to see a bit more sensible policy, and we found some oil. And oil does distort this picture a bit. But subsequent to that, we started to see a pickup. Some of the noises that we're seeing around the mining industry, around the oil and gas industry, and around the general business climate, and just the actual ability to implement certain things like the ability to get a water permit, is very worrying. And it is detrimental to investment. And so we need to be very careful here. But Namibia has enormous potential, and this is the good news. Namibia's got this very, very good geostrategic location. It's very relevant for a number of reasons, and we've got an excellent video on this that you can watch, because I was going to talk more about it, but you can watch it and it explains why Namibia is possibly the greatest country in the world. And I'm surprised you recorded the possibly. It is the greatest country in the world. And it sits at the doorstep to this incredibly important continent, a continent that's got every resource known to man, that's got one of the last big growing populations, that's got enormous potential. And we sit very strategically located there, great port, very strategic, great history, etc., etc. So Namibia stands to do extraordinarily well if we play our cards right. And we've used this slide rather a lot now, but I think it's actually the most important point. Namibia has the building blocks for this enormous success. We have a world-class financial system. I put that first because I work in it. We have an independent judiciary. I put that second because I don't want them to come after me. We have peace and stability. We have a great climate and basic, and not business climate, but climate and basic infrastructure. Most of our infrastructure is excellent. I mean, like, I travel a lot, far too much. And whenever I land back in Namibia, I'm thankful for the quality of the roads, the airports, we've got, and the peace and stability is something else. We have such a harmonious population. The tension that you feel in South Africa, you don't feel in Namibia. People want to get along. You never or very rarely meet an unpleasant person. They may not be great at issuing your water abstraction permit, but they're extremely pleasant while not doing it. And we have a high standard of living. If you have a relatively small amount of resources, we have a very high standard of living. We have a small population, potential for growth, enormous potential for growth in Namibia and outside of Namibia. But we need to get these things right. It's not macro versus micro. Government focuses on macro. It's not macro versus micro. Businesses focus on micro. Micro aggregates to macro. Micro doing well is good for macro. Macro doing well is good for micro. This is an ecosystem that's fundamentally important. So private sector must do what it needs to do to make some money. to make some profit. It should use that profit responsibly, ideally, but make some profit, grow, create more jobs, create more opportunities, and so on, and pay your damn tax. Public sector needs to take those taxes and to invest that into enabling infrastructure. I would love to have rail infrastructure, but I can't build it myself. It's public infrastructure. The macroeconomic value of the infrastructure is greater than the cost of the infrastructure. The microeconomic value is less than the cost of the infrastructure. So it has to be done at macro level, but also ensure that kids born side A of the railway track and side B of the railway track are not, their futures are not preordained, that they have opportunities to have the best life possible in a global context. Not depends who your parents are, depends, this, but create that equality of opportunity through provision of services like world-class healthcare, world-class education, housing, etc. This is incredibly important. And the last point that I want to make here is people don't understand the impact of this dependency, these dependency ratios. So we have this very small number of taxpayers. We just looked at the individual taxpayers, not the corporate taxpayers as well. We have this very small number of taxpayers, but half the population is not, half of the working age population is not employed. Only 20% of the overall population is employed. And so you have a very small number of net contributors to the tax net and a huge number of people who need those resources. Now imagine just keep tax revenue exactly as it is, but have 90% of the population or of the working age population employed. And those resources can be used so much more efficiently for those that are not able to help themselves. At the moment, we have something like 30,000 NAM dollars per person per year in the fiscus. That's nothing. For school, healthcare, roads, all these things, it's nothing. But imagine if far more people are able to help themselves, if far more people have jobs, and far fewer people need support from the state. Then just this same 90-odd billion of government expenditure or government revenue, just that same 90 billion, if you're supporting 10% of the population, goes from 30,000 to 300,000. It makes a huge difference. And this, I think, is probably the key point to leave behind. Obviously, if we get the micro right, that fiscal revenue also doesn't stay at 90 billion. It will increase to multiples of that. That leaves people better able to help themselves, and it leaves government much better able to help those that are not able to help themselves. And I'll leave it at that because I've gone way over time. So thank you.
Would you make your slides over there?
Yeah.
As we discussed them.
You want to do questions?
Yeah, I don't know. I must just okay. Okay. It's the mic. Thank you very much, Roland Brown, for a very differentiated view on the economy in Namibia, the stumbling blocks, the challenges, the opportunities, and I like the way you closed off the positive tonality about the potential that we have in Namibia that is untapped, and that is really the key objective of today's seminar, is to get the private and the public sectors to move together, establish a common vision in terms of one Namibia. Now,
This one.
we've actually ready now for the tea and coffee break. I just quickly want to see by show of hands. There are probably a lot of questions. Would there be a lot of questions? Just put up your hands, please. 1, 2. Okay. Can I maybe, I attended a PKF conference in Lagos the other day, and there was a professor who was 60 years old, my age. He said he doesn't believe in sacrifices anymore. He's reached the stage of his life where he wants to enjoy life to the fullest. Can I maybe ask Roland if you sacrifice maybe take these questions on, because I really think we want to move ahead, if that's fine with you. But let's remember the following points: the definitions of profit, investment, capitalist got no nationality, the closing remarks, the potential that Namibia's got, the micro and the macro definitions. And the good news is Roland has just confirmed he will make available his presentation. So those that are interested in the presentation can just drop us an email, or we'll send it to all the course participants. I don't know whether you,
No, that's fine.
Are you fine with that? Okay. Then you'll be even more known all over Namibia, and everybody will call you for future engagements. But at this juncture, I would just like to thank Roland Brown with a big round of applause. Thank you very much. This is the time everybody We will engage with them during the coffee break. We will then have the coffee break because it's spot on. But we've got the NIPDB coming up at 22:11. So the coffee break is a quick 20 minutes. 22:11, we'll have the NIPDB. And then the big round of questions will then start. That's to be moderated by Benita Hammer, and she will have to catch up on the time. No, we haven't lost any time. Let's just make that point. We haven't lost any time. It was time very well spent. And then we can also address the questions that we potentially have for the NIPDB in Benita's session. So let's have a quick coffee break. There are some roles here. Thank you very much. See you back at 22:11 sharp.
Wir hatten nur einen. Das ist angekündigt an, das muss man reinstiften.
Ich habe Sorge, dass ich dann.
Also am besten da, wo das, aber wenn jetzt alle rausgehen, dann ist es ja weniger neu.